A spider. It frightened me as a girl when I first saw it in Mother's studio because I thought it was an enormous spider, tall as a house. It looked like one of Louise Bourgeois', but it was robotic, nothing natural about it. And this might have made it even worse, because if it killed you, you knew it had no earthly reason to. Its steel legs stretched 20 feet above me, the 8 of them gleaming in the industrial light from the ceiling. Each leg reached a different wall or corner. That's how big it was. That's why we've never had it moved, even decades after Mother's death. One reason, anyway. We've always been afraid that if we moved it, it might stop working. I'm amazed that it's still working. The scariest part of the spider was its head, of course, black with one fang poking toward the floor. Margaret teased me so badly that first day, saying that the fang was going to stab me right here, right in the heart, and suck my blood. You know how older sisters can be, so cruel. But we quickly learned that it wasn't a fang. It was much more like a spider's spinneret, casting its web around the cement floor. That's actually what Margaret called those sculptures, spider webs, until Mother finally said, "Call them your college tuition," or "Call them your mortgage payments," or "Call them your flights abroad." So she did. As Vicente gooped more wet clay into the basket, Margaret would say, "My college tuition is so messy," or "My house is under your fingernails, Vicente." Then Vicente would start up the gasoline engine, making this terrible noise. It's a wonder that people relied on gasoline for so long. The spinneret would begin swirling around in circles very slowly, releasing the clay in long, smooth strands that, after a day of these very methodical revolutions, would create one of Mother's sculptures. Writing thousands of these codes was hard enough. Before that, she insisted that we build a printer that used fused deposition modeling. It would have been so much easier to use selective laser sintering. But we visited this Red Hook SLS print shop, and she just kept shaking her head at the machines lined up inside the building. And she kept saying, "These printers aren't fun to watch, Susan. Boring, boring, boring. Give me the one that spits out the gunk and spins around in circles." I tried telling her that with each sculpture being the size of like a 1950s computer, that an FDM printer that was big enough, it just wouldn't print cleanly. I tried turning to the technician showing us around, but he was so nervous next to Celia that he wouldn't even agree with me. And she said, "You'll find a way," and smiled out the door. "You're smarter than me." Right. It took months to find a way. When we were deep into doing tests, Celia and I were standing on either side of the spider's print bed. Vicente was up on his ladder, lumping pounds of wet clay into this white barrel that fed through long tubes into the spider's nozzle. Yeah, it's spinneret. From down below, I hit a few keys on my laptop. Vicente slapped the big black start button, and we were off on our millionth test run. The spider started unspooling the clay onto the build platform. Everything seemed to be going great. Like, going great, long smooth lines onto the platform. And then the clay just stopped. I thought we had to go back to square one and choose a new material. Celia wanted the finished product, the sculpture, to last forever. Or for as long as it could, but we couldn't use molten metal with an FDM printer. So things like stainless steel and titanium were out. I tried convincing her one more time that if she wanted it to last forever, we should really consider SLS. But she didn't want to use anything with lasers. I didn't know why it mattered. So she said, if it ever breaks, I want this thing to be simple to fix. I want the VW bus of 3D printers. So I brought her some basic materials that are usually used in FDM printers. On top of wanting this spider design, Celia didn't want the sculptures to need any manual touch-ups after they finished printing. She just wanted to pop them right off of the platform. So I mostly showed her thermoplastics. They come in these big spools of plastic cord. You basically use it like a hot glue gun. You feed the long strand of plastic into the printer melts it, and then the extruder shoots out the melted plastic to make whatever shape you're going for. She shook the floppy filaments around saying, No, this is all wrong. We need to go as natural as possible. We don't know what will be available then. I'm thinking, then? In the future, she said. But how far into the future? And she asked, how long do you think the Earth will exist? So I pitched PLA, polylactic acid. And when that hardens, it makes for a pretty durable material. And you can even use food waste to make it. So Celia said, I love it. There will always be food waste as long as there are people. We spent days acting like chemists, boiling it up in our studio. But every time we put our food-based concoctions through the printer's extruder, it just gooped across the platform like a pancake and didn't keep its shape. It wasn't exactly what I was originally hired to do. We tried a dozen materials and several variations of each. I suggested air drying clay because it fit the requirements. You wouldn't need to do anything with it once it was made. You could pop it right off of the platform. It was natural and it held its shape, but not in water, she said. Well, no, I said. It would dissolve in water. With climate change, she said, this whole shithouse could be underwater. It needs to be water resistant. I didn't know why these needed to last for so long. She said she might be ready to reconsider regular clay, though. She said, clay fits the bill as long as we fire it afterwards, and I kind of like that idea. I mean, people have been firing clay for millennia. I don't see why they couldn't for a few more. And once you fire it, it lasts for thousands of years. So I say we do it. You got it, Susan. This is such a great idea. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I never understood that. She could rail against every idea I had for like a week and then tell me how smart I was after she basically proposed whatever we finally went with. Everyone was really on edge after months of this. Vicente and I got into this huge argument after he didn't level out the print bed correctly, and the first sculpture ended up looking like the Leaning Tower of Pisa had a stroke. And all through that time, Celia just let Margaret and Anna Maria run up and down the High Line while the three of us argued all day. No, we weren't exactly happy by the day the clay just stopped extruding. Vicente looked down from his perch and asked, what is it now? I turned to Celia, who, thank God, didn't seem upset this time. But the printer started making this terrible noise. Vicente hadn't shut it off yet. The extruder rattled like it was about to blow a gasket. I thought we needed to go a little higher end than the VW bus of 3D printers. The extruder shook around so much that it started flopping around like a loose fire hose, whipping left and right with all the clay jamming up inside. I yelled up to Vicente like, turn it off! Turn it off! and I heard him clicking the button, but nothing would happen. Vicente yelled, "I'm trying to turn it off!" And the extruder flopped all over the place. The clay had never stopped pumping into the hose. The extruder was getting too backed up. It couldn't hold anymore. The clay began shooting out of the nozzle like wet bullets. I ran beneath the spider to try to wrangle down the extruder to stop it from breaking. And Celia said, "Let it go! Let it go! It's not worth it!" I got clocked right on top of my head by one of these clay balls. And I still looked up like an idiot and let this thing shoot me square in the face. Celia screamed, "Stop the spider!" A third clay ball pelted me in the face and knocked me onto the print bed. I was inches deep in clay. Vicente kept yelling, "I am trying!" And then the printer finally whirred to a stop. But we didn't have time to think about what just happened. The elevator at the opposite end of the studio dinged. We all turned to watch the doors open. A policeman was escorting the girls back to their mother once again. And his jaw dropped when he took in the enormity of the spider and the ankle-deep mess of clay that I stood in, and the frazzled looks on Celia down below and Vicente up high. We were maybe halfway to our first successful sculpture that day. Mother did not exactly save her money. Margaret and I were walking home from PS 33 on a Tuesday afternoon when we saw her rushing toward us on the sidewalk. We were maybe a block away from our apartment on 18th. She had an expression on her face that we'd seen more than once. It said that she had failed, but she couldn't admit that she'd failed, so instead she was going to smile. A rather tight, conflicted smile. She said, "Girls, we're moving into the studio for a while." This surprised us then, but it doesn't surprise me now. Back then, we didn't know what was happening or why. Vicente pulled up in his van beside us. Margaret and I buckled into the front passenger seat, one belt across both of our laps, and Mother sat on the floor behind Vicente's stick shift. As I watched our block grow smaller in the rear-view mirror, Margaret whispered, "But the spider lives in the studio." Neither Mother nor Vicente answered her. It was very hard to sleep that first week. They were still going through months of testing, and the spider's engine was very loud before they switched to solar power. But we got used to it. I got so used to it that I needed it at night. For maybe 5 years after she died. Anna Maria and I knew she was sick. At least I knew something was wrong. Anna Maria is 2 years younger than me. And even after all these years, she still goes out of her way to remind me that she's younger than me. But anyway, because of that age difference, she might not have known as soon as I did. And I didn't dare say anything. It was unthinkable. Mother could not be stopped. But one day in her studio, we heard her vomiting in the bathroom. And we went to the door, and Vicente was rubbing her back. And she moaned, "Hannah Wilkie still looked great at the end. Breasts still look great. I can barely breathe." She was trying to have a sense of humor, but she just coughed for a long time as Vicente continued to rub her back. And when she finally stopped, she said, "Please let me be. Please just let me die." Vicente sighed, stood up and walked out the door between Anna Maria and me, not saying a word. He just paced around the spider. Mother finally turned to see us in the doorway. She shook her head, and very slowly she reached for the sink and pulled herself up. She scooped water across her face and leaned against the counter, looking into the mirror, staring at us or into us, as if she wanted to explain it all telepathically. But then she sat us down on the couch beneath the windows that faced the Hudson River. I remember Vicente standing near us, but not beside us. He had his arms crossed and didn't seem to want to be there. He left the room before Mother spoke. She said, "No, girls, part of me is gonna die. The part that you see day to day. But not all of me. I'm making sure that you're cared for."
Celia? She never wore a mask at the front door of Respite 1. No, with that brown haze of God knows what swirling all around us for a few days. I asked her if she wanted to wear a mask. It would be okay. There was nothing against it. It was recommended. But she said that when the crews walked through our doors, she wanted them to be greeted by a face and not a mask. When I asked her again a few days later, she told me that the EPA said the air was fine. And that was true. The EPA did say the air was fine, but anyone looking at it knew that that was bullshit. Anyone breathing it. There were people with symptoms just a few months after they started working the pile. I guess Celia was lucky she had 15 years.
Yes, Celia and I rode in the middle row of your minivan. Her daughter's feet didn't yet reach the floor from the seats behind us. You had just picked us up from LAX to take us to our hotel across town. The hotel was as close as possible to Jago's new museum for Celia's meetings with its curators and architects the next morning. Celia needed crutches to walk across more than a room, and if she needed to walk across more than a room, the crutches began to hurt her, so proximity was a necessity. She did not want to postpone a meeting about the installation of boxers. She was still youngish, in her 40s, but Celia already had trouble sitting upright for very long. So, instead, she sat slumped against the van's sliding door window. Her body bent awkwardly over the armrest. I asked, "Would you like me to fold up your armrest? It looks like it might be digging into your ribs." She turned to me and smiled. A weak smile, but still a smile, because she still liked to be funny in her own way. "But if we move the armrest," she said, "I might fall into the crack between the seat and the door." You grinned in the rear-view mirror at your sister's self-deprecating joke and said, "She's just being stubborn." No, Celia said. "I'm enjoying the sights. I want to lean on the window." Just then, I looked past her and noticed a billboard displaying one of Cindy Sherman's more famous works, The Girl Hitchhiking. It stood alongside the freeway, and I thought I saw Celia shaking her head at it. Even before we exited LAX, we had begun seeing posters for Cindy Sherman's major show at the Broad. It was the Broad's first solo exhibition. We were unable to attend the opening party. Travel had become less frequent in the past year, but it was a major affair, with Hollywood stars attending, perhaps bringing the art world back to where it had been in the early 80s. But less fun, of course, because nothing was dangerous anymore. We saw Cindy's posters lining the walls on our way to the baggage claim, and after you picked us up and we swerved between the traffic of the 405 and then the 10, we saw her billboards along the freeway. She was larger than life. But perhaps more unexpectedly, when we exited the 10 and began driving through the streets downtown, we saw that Cindy's face graced every single lamppost, seemingly in the city of Los Angeles. The Broad had paid for an advertising campaign unlike any we'd ever seen, not just for a single exhibition, but for an entire museum. There was Cindy as a working girl above us at the corner of Olympic and Figueroa. There was Cindy as a wealthy matriarch at the corner of Olive and 6th. Cindy as a clown at San Pedro and 3rd. Cindy as an over-tanned fitness fanatic, a furious fashionista, a centerfold, a medieval bride. Not only every block, but every lamppost, Cindy's face stared off from above. I turned to Celia, who had obviously seen all these posters as well. Her forehead was still pressed against the window. I tried to dismiss it, saying, "It's a bit overindulgent." Without turning her head, she continued looking out the window and said, "I'm not jealous if that's what you're thinking." You gave a short, "Ha! Of course not," I said. "But it's okay if you are." She said, I'm really not," and turned to me and then back to the window. She said, "I'm really happy for Cindy. She's Hollywood famous now." What other woman's work would be recognizable enough to post on every single lamppost in LA? This isn't even just about her. This is way bigger than Cindy. This is massive. This is amazing. We drove another block. Cindy is a college party girl. And Celia squawked her own and said, "Maybe I'm a tiny bit jealous." You smiled and nodded your head several times in the rearview mirror. "But," Celia said, "don't you dare ever tell her that. Girls?" She slowly turned back to look at her daughters. She asked, "Do you want to see my face everywhere in town?" The girls looked up from their tablets. Margaret said, "No," in a very straightforward, dispassionate manner. Celia smiled and said, "Okay. We won't do that then." After our long journey from New York, you dropped us off at our hotel before you drove to whichever suburb you lived in. Was it Sherman Oaks? Thousand Oaks? Okie Oaks? No, I don't remember. I remember that it was very far away. You'd offered to pick us up, I gathered, because you didn't know how many more times you'd see Celia again? This trip to LA was the first time we'd left New York in more than a year. Celia wasn't expected at the future site of the Jago until the next morning, so we had most of the day to ourselves. The girls, of course, wanted to go to the pool, so the four of us took the elevator to the pool deck in our bathing suits, which made me feel as if I was on vacation for the first time, maybe ever. But when I turned to Celia, she seemed to shrink into herself, maybe more than she literally had by then, and she made a point of covering herself with a very large beach wrap. She had me digging through our 3 suitcases to find it, and when I did find it, I was surprised it took me so long because it was so large. I said, "Celia, you have your beach shorts, your tunic. You don't need this blanket wrapped around you for a short elevator ride." But she insisted. She did not say she didn't want anyone to see her body. Maybe because I would have told her once again that she looked perfectly fine. She largely did. I don't think everyone would be able to say what afflicted her, but she wrapped this enormous shawl around her body, looking something like a magenta mummy on crutches, and probably drew even more attention to herself than she would have without it on. The elevator opened to the rooftop. It overlooked the Hollywood Hills, downtown, and, if you squinted very tightly, the Pacific Ocean in the distance. There was that very particular LA smog providing a haze over all the buildings, a haze that almost does not look like pollution. It could just be the foggy borders of a nostalgic memory, which, I suppose, is just another type of pollution, though I suppose not quite so unhealthy. The girls immediately ran to the pool's edge and jumped into the glittering water. They scared away the few adults in the shallow end. A line of lounge chairs with blue cushions lined one edge of the pool, and 4 cabanas sat behind the lounge chairs. Clay pots with palms or monstrous birds of paradise decorated the sun deck. Celia reserved a cabana with a bed and slowly climbed inside. First her head disappeared in the cabana's shadow, and then her body, and finally one last foot. I could not tell if she could see anything from where she lay. I put down our beach bag and walked to the pool. The girls saw me and began chanting, "Cannonball! Cannonball! Cannonball!" I glanced at the other adults with their legs in the pool. They were all adults, young, glamorous adults. It seemed that no children stayed at this hotel. For a moment, I was almost embarrassed to not be so young and fit and glamorous. But then I thought of Celia, who would not leave her cabana. So I decided that maybe I should at least act young while I could. And I grinned at the unsuspecting women seated along the edge of the pool. And I leaped into the air very high as I could, and folded my knees against my chest, doing the first cannonball I had done in probably 40 years. I had fun swimming with the girls, though after our fingers shriveled and the 3 of us sat at the edge of the pool, sometimes looking through the haze past the glass railings at the edges of the roof, seeing miles upon miles of buildings and only a sliver of the ocean in the distance. And maybe it wasn't even the ocean we were seeing. Perhaps it was mostly the sky, and we were deceived by the smog. But I think all 3 of us realized at the same time, no matter our very large age difference, that we could have done this very same thing in New York if we ever wanted to. So why weren't we doing something we could only do in LA? I deduced this mostly by what Anna Maria said next. "I miss the beach." "Ah, yes," I told her. "Well, I miss the beach as well, but we need to stay here to be near the Jago for your mother. She needs to be at a meeting early in the morning." But this did nothing to satisfy the little girl, of course. She sprang up, and her feet splashed across the sun deck, leaving tiny gray footprints between us. Anna Maria stood at the foot of Celia's cabana and said, "We all want to go to the beach." I did not hear Celia respond, but I could hear her coughing. Margaret and I stood up and dripped over to them. Celia's bare calves and knees poked out from the shadow of the cabana. She leaned forward, letting the sun catch her face and hair. "Yeah," Celia said. "I miss the beach too. The air downtown's no good for me anyway." She turned to me and said, "Let's tear down camp and head west." We booked the nicest hotel in Santa Monica that had 2 ocean view suites available. I said, "Celia, please, I don't need my own suite. I'll just stay in a basic room. I'll face an alley. I really don't care." And she said, "Really, Vicente, let's just enjoy this." Before I could hang Celia's clothes in the armoire, the girls had already put their bathing suits back on and asked us why we weren't at the beach yet. Celia smiled at them from the end of her bed and said, "Let's go. Forget the clothes, Vicente. I want to feel the sand between my toes before the sun goes down." The beaches in Los Angeles are massive. The sand stretches longer than a soccer field before one finally reaches the waves crashing ashore. When the 4 of us stood at the footpath outside the hotel leading to the beach, I worried whether Celia would even make it to the sand on her crutches. But she seemed unperturbed by the daunting distance ahead of us. In fact, she was first to start following Anna Maria and Margaret to the beach, swinging her mummified body along on her crutches. I had stood a moment longer, thinking we could go back to a pool at our new hotel. The views were better than at the first hotel, but Celia nearly kept up with the girls. When we finally reached the sand, Celia was clearly trying to not appear out of breath. I was surprised that she hadn't started coughing yet again, but the contorted look on her face told me that she held in a great deal of pain. Anna Maria and Margaret were already running ahead of us toward the water. "Girls," I yelled, "maybe we should play in the sand here, close to the hotel." They stopped and turned back to us, both of their shoulders slumping so hard I thought they might burrow into the sand. "But we want to go in the ocean," they both whined. Celia turned to me and said, "Then we're going to the ocean." Her crutches sunk into the sand. She swung her body forward. "Don't go so fast," Celia called out to the girls. She breathed heavily. Her lungs certainly couldn't keep up with all this movement, more than I'd seen in months. I wanted to ask if I may just carry her, but I also felt that to do so would offend her. She grunted and huffed and groaned. I told myself that if she ever looked over to me pleadingly, that I would step in and insist that she be carried. But she never so much as looked away from the ocean. She was dead set on being escorted by the girls to the water. With her crutches, she made 4 lines all the way across the beach because she didn't have the strength to lift any of the appendages fully off the ground. The sun was still hot despite being 5 p.m., but even if it had been 20 degrees cooler, I think that the physical exertion would have still made the sweat pour down her face, sometimes dripping off of her eyelashes. The waves became louder the closer we approached the water. We were at the ridge where the sand finally gets wet and slopes down into the ocean at low tide. But Celia did not stop. She followed the girls over the wet sand, the bottom of her crutches digging into it, making the sound of a knife carving bone. The remnants of a wave spread across the sand, inching its way over Celia's bare feet. And she finally stopped. The sun glowed across her face, her magenta wrap, making her appear to be on fire. She closed her eyes and lightly smiled. And for the first time in the 10 minutes that we'd crossed the beach, She seemed to enjoy the sea air. She exhaled more air than I thought her lungs were any longer capable of holding. She opened her eyes to watch the girls kicking up water in the shallow waves. Celia dropped her crutches and tried to slowly sit down. But she fell backwards, and I was worried that she was hurt. But she was laughing almost as soon as she landed on her back. We spent 2 hours in that one spot until the girls could no longer forgo dinner. Celia spent much of that time gazing up and down the beach. She said, "I wish I could go for a beach walk. I feel like I've been missing out on beach walks all of a sudden. You know, Vicente, maybe we should move the studio to LA. I think I've been missing out on this all my life. Maybe Bent was right. Maybe I was always supposed to be a California girl." I laughed. "You? I don't think any one country, let alone a single state, could have you to themselves, Celia Merode." "That might be," she said. "But really, if I beat this thing, I really think we should move the studio out here." "Yes," I told her, though probably not at all convincingly. "When you beat this thing." "Look at the girls," she said. "They've been in the water for nearly 2 hours now. I think they're Californians." "Girls!" They both turned to us. "Are you Californians?" They both smiled and said, "Yes, yes." And Margaret, the jokester between the two of them, she extended her arms to her front and back, pretending to be balancing on a surfboard, and said, "We're California girls." The next morning's meeting was disappointing, though Celia made as if it was nothing. There were delays in the construction. The building probably would not officially open until late 2018. Celia, however, wasn't concerned. She nodded and smiled at the board members. "We'll be here," she told them. I must congratulate the board members, because they did a very convincing job of saying how excited they'll be to have her at the opening party. A lift brought Celia back to the hotel where the girls had remained with you and your kids, their cousins. I told her that I had business to attend to at one of our friends' studios in Boyle Heights. She seemed disappointed that I would not be riding back to Santa Monica with her, but I insisted that it was very important. And it was. I walked into the studio truly astonished by what they had already accomplished. It was nearly finished. I had only called them the night before, mere minutes after I'd returned to my suite from the beach. I'd had the idea sooner, but I needed to hold my tongue in front of Celia so that it would remain a surprise. "You guys," I told them, "this is truly amazing. I didn't expect it to be nearly finished." And they looked almost embarrassed, blushing slightly, as my friend said, "Well, it's for Celia. We'd do anything for her." After some finishing touches, we loaded it up onto one of their trucks and drove back to Santa Monica. We already attracted stares as we carried it out onto the beach. People filmed us with their own cameras. We carried it to where I knew Celia and the family would be. I had remained in contact with her all afternoon, to the point where Celia became suspicious, wondering why I was so intent on knowing her location on the beach. She merely kept texting back, "Same place." I'd check again 15 minutes later. "Same place." And I checked again as we stood with it on the beach. OMG, same place. So we carried it to where she sat and watched her family play in the waves. Celia did not hear us coming. We stopped at her side and gently laid it down beside her. She turned, saw us, and the look on her face was equal parts disapproval and amusement as she leaned back to take it in. "What are you going to do with that?" "Do you like your sedan chair?" I asked. It was a truly marvelous chair. I'd asked our friends to take inspiration from the gestatorial chairs that the popes were carried on. The chair was no less than a king's throne, with red velvet lining the seat and back cushions. There were golden baubles that looked like pineapples adorning the top of the high backrest. Silver tassels blew in the wind from the bottom of the seat, and an intricate pattern of silver leaves and vines was painted on the frame of the chair, and the red velvet continued down to the steps that led up to the throne, and there were, of course, 2 long wooden poles jutting from both sides like skis. "My sedan chair?" she said. Yes, I said. "It is for you. We are going to take a beach walk, like you asked." And she said, "That's not what I meant, Vicente." "Ah, but this is even better," I said. She laughed and shook her head. She eyed the chair suspiciously. "No, I don't think so," she said. You laughed, but also appeared used to such nonsense. You said, "She told me too. I know she wants to go up and down the beach." And Celia said, "I don't think I want to do this." "Ah, I thought you might say that, but Celia," I became very serious, mock stern almost. "That is why I am making this a performance piece. You haven't helped me with one of my pieces in a very long time. I dare say it's been years even, so I am asking you to do so now. I need Celia Merode to ride on this beautiful sedan chair up and down the beach. And you are the only Celia Merode I know. So please, get in." She turned to you. "Don't look at me," you said. "I'm Marguerite Merode." Celia stood and gingerly stepped up to her throne. She climbed up and twisted her body around to take her seat. And she looked down at the poles that were half buried in the sand. "All right, boys," she said. "Let's get this over with. I had recruited 4 friends who were more or less fitter than other artist friends of ours." I said, "Okay, guys." And then the 4 of them stripped down to the tight matching magenta shorts we had bought on the way to Santa Monica. "Oh," Celia said. "Is this how it's going to be?" I took a position in front of them with a small camcorder, and then the men each took hold of a post. They hoisted her up into the air, and Celia giggled. She was not prone to giggling, but here she giggled. The men positioned the poles on their shoulders, and then we paraded down the beach. I had my camera, and the girls followed along with their cousins and you. At first, Celia appeared embarrassed, bouncing along as she was carried among the sunbathers and beach walkers. People began asking who this magnificent woman was that we carried down the beach, and without even needing to tell my carriers, they immediately barked back, "This is Celia Merode. She is the greatest living artist in the world." Celia again giggled. She buried her face into the palm of her hand, and then it would happen again. Somebody would ask who she is, and they were immediately told that she was Celia Merode, the greatest artist in the world. And it was so beautiful. People started waving to her and telling her how honored they were to meet her. I doubt that many, if any of them, had ever really heard of her before, but they knew that they were in the presence of greatness. They were told so it must be true. You could see it in the way their faces glowed. A woman on the sand shouted, "We love you, Celia!" And by this time, Celia had begun to take her royal duties quite seriously. She yelled back, "And I love you too!" She grandly waved back to the crowds who had begun surrounding and following us down the beach. At another point, 2 absurdly strong men who appeared to have just left Muscle Beach approached my carriers and asked if they could help. So the sedan chair then had 2 muscle-bound bodybuilders leading our procession. And all the while, you'd hear somebody at the outskirts of the crowd ask who we were carrying. And yet more people, our new followers, would announce back to them, "The greatest artist in the world!" Some people thought we were filming a traditional movie, or worse, one of those viral campaigns. Then somebody asked again, Who is this? The greatest artist in the world! Celia was laughing all the while, reaching down to shake all the hands that reached up to shake hers. The greatest artist in the world! Hours later, after the crowds had dispersed and we needed time to bask in the memory of the fun we'd just had that day, Celia and I sat on the beach, squeezed side by side into the sedan chair. It sat on the sand, facing the waves and the sunset. The girls had long gone back into the hotel with you after being in the sun for too long that day. I had an electricity I hadn't felt in a long time. We should bring this all over LA, I said. People would love it. We should show up outside of a Dodgers game. We can start at Dodger Stadium and carry you all the way down to Echo Park and Silver Lake. It'd be magnificent. The faces. People would light up just believing that they were in the presence of greatness. Which of course they were, but even the children, they certainly didn't know who you were, but they looked up at you as if you were their queen. We need to bring this everywhere. Maybe we bring it across the country. A road trip. Celia laughed along with me. And then she shook her head. Oh, she said softly. Her tone became somewhat sullen. You know I can't do that. I suddenly lost my moment of electricity and was brought back down to the reality we shared. But, I said, trying to say words I knew I didn't believe in, even just earlier that day. You'll beat this. She smiled at my naivete, like I told a joke I did not understand. She closed her eyes and shook her head. She opened them to me again. Thank you, she said. I said, you're welcome, and paused. For what? For this. She waved her palm at the sedan chair beneath us. For everything, really. I smiled at her. Of course, I said. I looked down at my lap and then up at the sun that was setting over the Pacific. It had no clouds to skirt past. It was just there in front of us, golden and alone. Despite Los Angeles' pollution, the smog must not have reached across the ocean because the sunset lacked the vibrant colors we were accustomed to in New York. It was just the sun, alone, sinking down to the ocean. Then she said, you know, Vicente, I think it might be nice to die here. In LA? Right here, she said. On the beach. In this chair. Right now. Oh? I do not like this idea. I could just sit here, she continued, and watch the sunset. And then I could just die. I'd be okay with that. Should we try it? Try it? Here, she said, maybe we should film this. Get out your camera. Or just your phone, that'll work. I pulled out my phone. Maybe film it from farther back, she said. Yeah, stand about 10 feet over there, and just get me sitting in the chair looking off into the sunset. I slid off the chair and took 5 steps onto the beach. How is that? Celia asked. I tilted the phone onto its side and began filming the sunset, the ocean lapping ashore, and Celia together. The sunlight was brilliant against her in the chair. The orange glow was stunning across her face. And minute by minute the light dampened until the sun slowly disappeared behind the curve of the Pacific, and my phone's camera could only pick up the black silhouette of Celia sitting in her chair. I was afraid to ask if I should stop filming because I did not want to learn that there would be no response. So I stood for a minute, another minute, another minute. I was hoping for her to yell cut. Well, she finally said, and I nearly dropped my phone. Download it, Vicente. Throw a label on it. I don't know. Celia escapes death or something. Keep the money for it. I helped her down from the sedan chair, and I picked up her crutches. We took our first few steps back to the hotel. Maybe I'm not really dying, she said as she slid a foot through the sand. Maybe I'm not. Wouldn't that be nice? Yeah, this is Old Man's Creek. It's been a long time. I don't even say crick anymore. You know how a lot of Iowans do. No, I probably haven't been back to these stomping grounds since the early 80s. Well, I've been home, you know, every now and again, but I haven't been back to the creek since, well, not since before Anna Mendieta died. I should have come back. I don't think we'll find any silhouettes anymore. Everything she did around here was impermanent. It was meant to fade away. There are some silhouettes she carved out of a rocky cliffside outside of Toronto. And I've seen those. They might still be there. And I hear that a few things she did when she got to go back to Cuba are still there. But these were all things that were out in the elements. I guess cave paintings are still around 20,000 years later. Yeah, let's go. But I don't think that Anna ever went too deep into any caves to make her work. The elements will sand them down eventually. It's funny to come back here for an honorary degree. I thought I was too good to stay here. I don't even have my speech written, no. But maybe I'll talk about Anna instead of myself, because there is something very special about being introduced to an artist who you suddenly know, unequivocally, you love more than anything. Just hours before you went about your life, you might have been happy. You might have thought your life was complete. Or at least as complete as a 10-year-old like I was might have thought life could be. And then somebody comes along and just shatters the very small worldview you once had. It's scary at first because you didn't realize how stupid you were before. Nobody likes to feel stupid. People don't even like to think they were once stupid. They won't admit it. Everyone walks around like they never needed anyone to wipe their ass. But sometimes you get stunned out of your ego. Sometimes an artist comes along who you very much need, who you didn't know you needed, and you suddenly see the world through a more realized lens by seeing how they see things. You finally understand that you were foolish, but now you know that the world is a few square feet bigger than before. A few feet more terrifying, a few feet more joyful. That's how Anna Mendieta was for me. Anna let me know what was possible out in the world. Hell, she let me know what was possible in Iowa City. I still love Anna Mendieta. It's strange, though. She's been dead for so long. I've lost some of that connection to her. I hope people will continue to remember her. Yeah, this is where the Toombas were. I'm pretty sure. It's hard to tell. But I think this is where she put them. I think this is where we were that day. I think this is it. Does it look like the ground is higher there? Or there? Or there? Is that a natural mound, or do you think Anna did that? I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe this isn't where she was. Maybe I've never been here before. It's been a long time. It's been a long, long time.